When Love Leaves Quietly, a story of empty rooms, unspoken goodbyes, forgotten music, and the beautiful, bitter process of learning to breathe alone again. When he left, the house didn't change. That was the first betrayal. Not from him, not from me, but from the world itself. I stood in the center of the living room, waiting for something to collapse. The silence should have roared, the walls should have wept, but nothing did. Everything held its shape, as though he had never mattered, as though love hadn't once warmed these walls. His toothbrush was gone from the ceramic cup beside mine. That's how I knew it was real. Not the missing jacket or the 3 empty hangers in the closet, but that cup was suddenly too spacious. His razor still lived in the drawer, maybe out of forgetfulness, maybe mercy. I never moved it. It stayed there like an artifact from a life we used to share. I didn't tell anyone, not right away. What could I say? That my marriage had evaporated without sound or spectacle? That no one had yelled or cheated in front of me? That there was no storm, only drought? Our lives had eroded slowly. Not from neglect exactly, but from the absence of presence. We became co-inhabitants, passing each other like strangers who once knew how to kiss. I remembered the way we used to laugh while cooking, that easy, intimate kind of laughter that sounds like home. It had disappeared long before he did. There were signs, yes. The distant stares, the evenings he stayed out longer than he needed to, the space he said he was claiming for himself. I could smell a difference in him, a subtle perfume that didn't come from my collection. I wasn't foolish. I was just tired. Too tired to investigate what I already understood. Love doesn't always end in violence. Sometimes it just decays unnoticed, until you finally see the mold growing over what used to be sacred. He had someone else. Of course he did. I never needed confirmation. The pieces fit without me forcing them. I recalled meeting her once, months before the silence truly began. A work event. Her handshake was light, her smile practiced. I'd seen enough women like her, full of unspent potential and subtle ambition, wide-eyed but grounded. She must have seen me too. His wife, the one whose presence he wouldn't acknowledge that evening. There had been no confrontation afterward, no drunken fight, no accusatory questions, just the steady continuation of daily rituals, like nothing had shifted. But inside, something had. Something had torn softly, almost imperceptibly. Winter arrived like a mirror of my inside, barren trees, pale skies, and air too sharp to breathe deeply. I hibernated in my own life. I declined invitations, avoided familiar cafes, and didn't return my mother's voicemails. To the world, I was just busy. That's how people explain away a quiet disappearance, isn't it? I'd type "I'm okay" to my group chat and then silence the conversation. No one followed up. Not really. That's how distance works. It requires so little effort to create and even less to maintain. I went through the motions, watering the plant he gave me on our 2nd anniversary, folding towels, and organizing mail. Sometimes I'd stop halfway through and forget what I was doing. My hands would rest on the edge of the sink or on a plate I hadn't finished drying, and I'd just stare. Not crying, not thinking. Just watching the space he left behind. That strange, loud silence. The bed was the worst, especially in the mornings. He never took the left side with him. I could still feel the shape of his weight when I turned over. I began waking up before the sun, not out of purpose, but because sleep had become a stranger I couldn't trust. I found the piano keys stiff under my fingers. I used to teach children mostly. I played in small recitals filled with community applause and forgotten names. Music used to be therapy. Then marriage happened, then work, then exhaustion. I didn't even notice when the music stopped meaning anything. Like everything else, it just faded. There's a kind of sadness you can't explain. Not to friends, not to a therapist. It's the sadness that comes without a name, like a fog instead of a storm. The loss of a future you never verbalized. The realization that your life has quietly rerouted while you weren't paying attention. One afternoon, while cleaning out drawers I hadn't opened in years, I found the folded photo from the scan, the one from the pregnancy I never told him about. It was too early, the doctor had said. It happens often. But nothing about it felt common to me. I had grieved it alone, cramped on the bathroom floor with a towel in my mouth to keep from waking him. He had been overseas. I never mentioned it. What would have been the point? I wasn't even sure what we would have done if it had lasted. We hadn't been ready. Not for a child, and not even for the truth of each other. I folded the photo again and placed it back. Some grief lives better in the dark. By spring, the grief didn't leave. It just changed shape. The house stopped feeling like a mausoleum. It became a vessel, something to hold me as I tried to figure out how to live again. I opened the windows, rearranged furniture. I kept his navy sweater, the one with the torn cuff. Not for memory, just because it was warm. I stopped stalking his online profiles. I stopped imagining scenarios in which we'd run into each other and I'd look effortlessly radiant, transformed by solitude. That kind of fantasy exhausts the soul. Eventually, I gave his things away. Not ceremoniously, just bag by bag, one trip to the donation center at a time. His favorite mug went last. I walked more. Not for fitness, just for proof that I still existed. I watched people on benches, leaning into each other, whispering things. I liked the way they moved, the choreography of connection. It made me feel less like a ghost. And slowly I started thinking, what if I started over? I didn't need an answer. The question itself was enough, a seed, a shift. I didn't miss him. I didn't hate him either. My heart was neither open nor closed, just be quiet. Like a room waiting to be filled again, not with love necessarily, but with something that breathes. Some stories don't end with explanations. Some people leave without finishing the sentence. And still, the world spins. Still, the walls stand. Maybe that's enough. Summer unfolded not with promise, but with an unspoken truce between what had been and what might still be. The trees outside grew thick with green again, and the light poured in longer each day. I began to notice the color of things, the blush of a tomato at the market, the gold woven through a stranger's hair, the precise blue of evening just before darkness fell. There was a stretch of road near the park where I used to walk with him. I started walking it again alone, not because I was trying to reclaim it, but because it no longer hurt. The memories were still there, his hand in mine, a joke about ducks, the scent of something fried from a food cart, but they didn't demand anything from me anymore. They existed like postcards from a different life. I could glance at them, even smile, and keep walking. I changed the locks. I didn't need to. He wasn't coming back, but I wanted the sound of a new key, something final, something symbolic. I told myself it was for safety, but it was really for ritual. We need rituals to mark the quiet deaths no one else sees. I found myself spending time in places I used to avoid. A cafe near the library, a bookshop that played classical music and smelled like old wood and cinnamon. I sat alone at tables for two and didn't flinch when the waiters asked, "Just you?" I was learning to be seen again, not as a wife, not as someone left behind, but just as someone. A person with a name and skin and silence that didn't mean emptiness. There was a man I met once at the flower stall near the train station. He asked for help choosing peonies, saying they reminded him of his mother. He didn't flirt, didn't linger. He thanked me and left with a grin that touched only half his face. I didn't think of him again until days later, when I passed the same stall and noticed the pink peonies had gone. I wondered if they had lasted long in water. I wondered if he had. Little things began to stitch the days together. The shape of clouds, the way my cat curled beside me at night, and the feel of my fingers sinking into soil as I planted new herbs. I was relearning the contours of my own life. The things I hadn't touched because they were once shared. In the guest room, I painted the walls a soft dove gray. I moved a chair from the attic and placed it by the window. It became my place to read or not read, to sit and breathe and remember who I was before all the forgetting. Sometimes I still heard his name through old mutual friends, a song on the radio, or a rerun of a movie we used to love. It never came with pain anymore, just recognition, like passing someone you once studied with, familiar but irrelevant. There were no dramatic revelations, no unexpected letters, no apologies written on the backs of receipts. He didn't come back. I didn't expect him to. What surprised me was how quietly the grief unraveled once I stopped feeding it. I went back to playing the piano more regularly, not for recitals or students this time, just for myself. The music still echoed too loudly in the house some days, but I played anyway. My fingers found the melody again, even if they hesitated on the first note. One evening in early autumn, I stood in the kitchen barefoot, stirring soup. The wind had picked up, carrying the smell of rain and leaves. I thought of how many meals I had made while waiting for him to come home, and how many I now made without waiting for anyone. That night, I lit a candle at the dinner table, not out of sadness or ritual, just because I wanted to. I poured myself wine and used the good dishes. It wasn't loneliness, it was a presence, a quiet, anchored kind of presence. I thought about the child I never had. Sometimes, in my imagination, the child was a boy. Other times, a girl. They had his dark hair and my quietness. I pictured their laugh. Not because I wanted to indulge grief, but because imagining them brought a strange peace. I carried them with me, not as a loss, as a possibility. A version of love that had lived, however briefly. I gave the scanned photo a frame eventually. Small, simple. I placed it on a shelf in the guest room. Not hidden, not explained, just there. I stopped asking why. Some stories don't need answers. Some hearts just drift apart the way tides pull away from a shoreline. It isn't always betrayal. Sometimes it's just timing, or where, or the slow, imperceptible retreat of affection beneath years of dust. One day, I found a note he had written years ago tucked into the back of a drawer. It was short, a scribbled message from a birthday long forgotten. There was nothing profound in it, just the words, "I'm glad you're in my life." I didn't cry. I didn't keep it. I read it, then let it go. Letting go has become a quiet art. Not dramatic, not defiant, just necessary. By winter again, I had built a rhythm. I taught music again part-time. Children with curious fingers and wide eyes. They reminded me that beginnings are everywhere, in every clumsy scale, in every offbeat note. The house no longer felt too quiet. It felt like mine. The walls didn't hold echoes anymore, just space. Beautiful, breathable space. I started to dream again, not of love or reunions, but of things like travel and poetry. I thought about visiting Kyoto in spring, about renting a small flat with a view of a river, about walking through cherry blossoms without needing anyone to share the beauty with but myself. I wasn't healed. I don't think we ever really heal in the way people expect, but I had shed enough. I had grown around the hollow, filled it with something new. Not love, not bitterness, just living. And that, in the end, was the quiet miracle I never saw coming.